Okay, well, let's hear the fan view of Arne Slot's momentous first season. Josh Sexton from the Anfield Wrap joined us. So this presumably has gone way beyond your expectations. Can we just go back to when he was appointed? What was your reaction at the time, and what do you think the sort of general mood was among fans when Arne Slot was confirmed as Jurgen Klopp's successor?
I'd say at the time it was hard to anticipate, really. If I was trying to sort of be level-headed about it because I didn't have much information about what Arne Slot was like as a coach or as a manager. We sort of had, the usual that you'd have stats from the Eredivisie and things like that over the past. But I think really it was the intangibles that we were looking for as Liverpool fans much more than anything else. We'd just lost a spiritual leader, someone who felt like more than just a football manager and the X's and O's of tactics in Jurgen Klopp. So it was almost like you were looking for the comfort of something else during that time. So I think understandably fans were a little bit divided. There were some who weren't happy with the appointment because it was somebody, completely unproven really in the eyes of most Liverpool fans that we were getting in to replace this, brilliant spiritual leader that we had in Jurgen Klopp. Whereas I think for some of us, we were almost just, waiting with bated breath a little bit because we had that confidence in the squad. Jurgen Klopp had talked about his confidence in what was to come next too, whether that was under Arne Slot or not. And of course, he'd confirmed at the end of the season that he had faith in Arne Slot in his sort of post-match speech after the Wolves game. So I think it was cautious optimism for the most part, but there was definitely some who were a little more critical of the appointment. Just as I say, it was one that lacked that sort of proven experience at the level we were looking to operate at.
How much do you think Klopp's endorsement sort of helped smooth the transition? I mean, that image of him singing the song to the Kop on that final day, it's sort of become quite iconic. That, I mean, not every manager would have been that sort of gracious and that accommodating in that moment. I mean, just how much did that help, do you think?
I think it did, and it's hard to say what sort of place it came from Jurgen Klopp, really, because he's a manager who I always felt like, a human being in general, I always felt like did things in good faith. But sometimes, in his press conference stuff, he was definitely able to, play games with the media and say things that he wanted to get across as messages to fans or players, or even just to sort of inject that message into the media. So he was capable of being, not so subtle in his messaging and trying to get across the point he wants to. And he'd have wanted there to be confidence in whatever was coming next for Liverpool. He understands, I think, Jurgen Klopp as well as anybody, that we've seen legacies of managers in the Premier League be followed up with nothingness. You think of, Alex Ferguson at Manchester United as the prime example, really, of, it felt like the squad that Ferguson left for David Moyes and then successor after successor to take over. From there, it was like almost no one could repair the damage of what Ferguson left in a way. And I think Jurgen Klopp was so intent on making sure that, whoever came in next, it wasn't, if they failed, it wasn't due to the squad. Jurgen Klopp had done the best that he could to make sure that he was leaving the squad in a good place and leaving this Liverpool team feeling confident about what came next. And then I think that sort of translated to the fan base in a way. The back end of the season was one to forget in many ways for Liverpool fans, the back end of last season. But I think Jurgen leaving it on that nice note, just with the winner against Wolves in general, but then, as you say, with that messaging after the final whistle too, it just felt like he injected a bit of life into the fans that day about what was to come next, and a bit of confidence into the fans about what was to come next.
But Josh, I've got to say, I mean, you mentioned Sir Alex Ferguson. I mean, I was at the game when Sir Alex Ferguson left and he said to the fans, "Get behind your next manager."
Your job now.
And that didn't work particularly well. So at what point did you realise that Arne Slot was the real deal and it wasn't just the endorsement of Klopp that made him a serious candidate for the job? He was actually, going to take the club forward.
I think, funnily enough, it was when we went to Old Trafford because, we've sort of seen this period of the last few years under Jurgen Klopp and particularly, that dominance over Manchester United in a lot of those games under Jurgen Klopp as a bit of an almost a touch point for how far we'd come and how far Manchester United had fallen away. And, there's a couple of other teams that you can compare with during that time. Obviously, Klopp was so competitive with City and we managed to get the best out of City in a couple of games at Anfield. And they were always the games that you almost looked out for in the calendar then as being the touch points of just how far this Liverpool side had come. So for Arne Slot to rock up, on his first visit to Old Trafford and to put in the performance they did and be as commanding as they did, I think that was the moment where we all sort of started to sit up and take notice and realise that everything that Jurgen Klopp said was set to come true, but also that Arne Slot was a serious football manager who was here to do the job.
I mean, it's interesting that you use United as the benchmark there because, let's be honest, for the last 10 years, they've been nowhere near the benchmark for anybody, but Man City's been your benchmark. But the reality we're talking about now is it's the 20th league title, which takes you level with Man United. So how big a deal is that? Because I know that when United overtook Liverpool in on 18 titles a few years ago. It was a massive deal for them. So is 20 titles significant beyond just winning the title this year?
It's hard to say, really, because obviously there's new generations of fans who've come in now who I don't know if they would be as bothered about the 20 times thing. You know, for me, I grew up in Cheshire, surrounded by United fans, so for me it's a big one to be able to get that back. I can get back at some of the lads I went to secondary school with and things like that. But for some, I don't think it would be as much of a big thing. And I think for the players, it probably wouldn't be as much of a big thing. I think you have seen players go either way on this issue, really. The quote I always come back to with Jurgen Klopp, which I think really sort of stands out in my mind when it comes to these sort of overall accolades, is when he first came into the club, he said, we're going to respect Liverpool's history, but we're not going to wear it in our backpacks and let it weigh us down. And I think you could see at moments where the players, you know, did let it weigh them down to an extent, or at least where there was an acknowledgement to the history. You know, James Milner holding up the six fingers after while he's running up the pitch in Madrid after we'd won that Champions League title. That was certainly like a nod to the history, and that you felt like there were times where, you know, there's been occasions, I reference those United games where we were on top, but there's been occasions even under Jurgen Klopp where we went to Old Trafford and maybe paid United a bit too much respect, or it felt like we always did that when we went to the Etihad against City. The Everton games always stand out on Jurgen Klopp as games where I think the players were a little bit too aware of all the wider context that comes with those kinds of games. So I think there were times where you could see that it could go either way, and I imagine that's exactly the same as how the reaction will be now. There'll be people who will be celebrating the idea of going ahead of Manchester United in league titles, but for some it will just be, you know, almost focusing more in the moment. We think this team is brilliant, we now think this manager is brilliant, and the proof is in the pudding because we're going on to win this league title.
And Josh, you mentioned something that Jurgen Klopp said there about sort of respecting the club's history but not being burdened by it. And I'd probably say from sort of a professional point of view this season, what's impressed me most about Arne Slot is that he's not been weighed down by following on from Slot in his, you know, in his press conferences, in his dealings with the media, and also in his dealings with the fans. I mean, that's been one of the big differences, hasn't it? We know Klopp was sort of larger than life after games often, that he sort of didn't have any hesitation going up to the cop and giving it large, but Arne Slot has been a little bit more reserved. I think you've seen a little bit more the last few weeks. He's been more open to building that relationship with the fans. But just from that perspective, how different has that been, having Slot compared to Klopp?
Yeah, it's funny really, isn't it? Because they're both very self-aware human beings. And I think you'd see Jurgen Klopp so often lose himself in the moment and then almost check himself, particularly in post-match press conferences. You know, him celebrating with Alisson on the pitch after we won that game in the derby at Anfield, and then coming out and almost apologising to, I think it was Marco Silva was the manager at the time, and apologising to the Everton team for his antics. And I think you've seen Arne Slot, you know, maybe get a little bit more lost in the moment than we expected. I think the derby is another sort of touch point for Arne Slot. He constantly referenced that loss to Nottingham Forest earlier in the season as well, and he constantly talks about the idea of chasing perfection, and I think he sees that within himself as much as he sees it within the squad, and that's where I think there are sort of similarities between him and Jurgen Klopp. But I think the emotional side of things is where Jurgen Klopp was you know, maybe met his own downfall sometimes. Really, it felt like Liverpool were riding such a wave of emotion that sometimes it would spill out in the wrong ways, whereas I think you've seen Arne Slot be much more of a cool and calm and collected customer, really. And that was certainly a thing that, you know, we on the Anfield Wrap were talking about a lot earlier in the season, was it felt like that was going to be an advantage that he'd have over Jurgen Klopp, rather than sort of focusing on the disadvantages, of which we felt like there were many because of how much Jurgen Klopp has proven during his time as manager. But I think what you've seen actually over the course of the season is that Slot has been able to deal with things on a lot more of a cool and calm level. I think you've seen that with, you know, changes in games and things like that, but you maybe have lost that little element of you know, every game being like a cup final, which, as I say, is one of those things that can go either way. Like, you don't want games against, you know, a Luton Town at home, for example, like we had under Jurgen Klopp, to feel like it's the biggest game you've ever played in your entire lives. But there have been times like that under Arne Slot this season where, you know, maybe Liverpool could have pressed on for a little bit more. You think about Aston Villa away as being a good example of that, where you felt like Liverpool maybe should have gone for the jugular there and made sure they secured a win in that game, but they almost just ease off the gas because they can see there's challenges to come around the corner.
I guess maybe the next challenge for Arne Slot this summer is I mean, I don't want to say this isn't his team because he's going to win the league and win it well, but you know, I think we all look at Liverpool and think they need to spend in the summer. There are holes in the squad. There's areas for improvement. Clearly, if Trent Alexander-Arnold goes, that creates another potential issue, whether you trust Conor Bradley to do that job or not. They're going to need more cover there, left back, centre forward, centre midfield maybe. How confident are you that Arne Slot can go into this sort of new phase of his managerial career and kind of mould this team in his own image now going forward?
I think that's the most exciting thing for me and a lot of Liverpool fans, really, is the idea that, there's still more identity that Arne Slot himself can imprint on this squad. If he's going to, go on and achieve the league title win with this squad this season, then we're going to celebrate so many of those players as heroes, really. And even some of them that will be lads that he didn't necessarily fancy. I think the reason that you've seen Liverpool probably, lacking a little bit performance-wise towards the back end of this season is that Slot has used quite a tight squad over the course, but really he definitely rotated more in the early parts of the season than the latter parts, and it tends to be, in most normal seasons with most normal managers who've got their own way with their squads and managed to imprint their identity, that actually they'll rotate more into the back end of the season because that's when things start to get a little bit more tired. But what I think you've seen over the course of the season is that Slot has trusted players like maybe Tsimikas and Harvey Elliott a little bit less. Chiesa has never truly come into the fold when we expected him to come to the party at times this season. There's been a couple of other players who he's almost not quite given the bow to in the way that we'd have, hoped, because we can see the quality is there in this squad. But, ultimately the manager has got his own ideas. He's got his own way that he wants to play. And I think that's what you'll see over the course of this summer now, is that he goes out and finds those players who he wants to, play his brand of football, who he thinks are more Arne Slot type players. And then you'll see, a much more bolstered Liverpool squad next season full of those options. And that's such an exciting prospect, I think, if you're a Liverpool fan, because, we're already going to go and win this league title this season. Who knows what more we could win with a manager who really feels like he's got a grip on his squad and has got exactly what he's looking for in terms of profiles, with, rather than 14 to 15 players, maybe we're talking about 17 to 18 of them next season.
Josh, you referenced the history before, and obviously all of us, including me, are too young to remember the kind of the transition from Shankly to Paisley back in the 70s. But a lot's been made of the fact that this kind of bears a bit, similarity in the sense that Klopp was like Shankly in the sense that the heartbeat of the club, a guy that's kind of built a new empire almost. And Slot's like the Paisley figure, this very understated, very calm, very measured guy that may actually take the club to a different level from the guy that actually built it in the first place. Can you see that comparison?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I grew up on the stories from, my dad telling me about the back end of Paisley's time and things like that. And the thing that he always spoke about with Paisley was that he was this sort of cool, calm and collected customer in exactly the same way that I referenced with Arne Slot before. And as you've mentioned there, Mark, Jurgen was that sort of Shankly figure where it was so much more to the club than just what he was able to do on the football pitch. And I think you see that in the scenes that you see when Jurgen Klopp leaves. It's very much akin to those interviews with the kids, that you're kidding me on, when they get told about Bill Shankly leaving the football club. That was almost the void that we were staring into when Jurgen Klopp did leave. And that's what we feel like we've, managed to replace now with Arne Slot. He does feel like that sort of Paisley figure that can go on and win loads of trophies, and he's going to do it with obviously a lot of the sort of hangover, if you want to call it that, from Jurgen Klopp's squad. A lot of lads who I think were such a part of that Jurgen Klopp identity. You've seen Virgil van Dijk and Mo Salah, for example, just sign new deals this week. They're going to make sure they help usher in this new Arne Slot era, leading by example and being as brilliant as they've both been this season. And you expect, lads like Alisson Becker and Ibu Konate to go on and sign their new deals too, and do exactly the same, sort of carry on that transition through those phases, and for it to be as, hopefully as seamless as Shankly to Paisley was, and so far so good on that score.
Josh, just finally, just give us a sense of what the celebrations are going to be like, because obviously the last title was the COVID year. Fans couldn't get into to really take part in it. How much will that make this time even more special?
It's hard to comprehend or put into words, really, to be honest. Like, this is the thing that we've been, I've been waiting for my entire life. I was born in August 1995, so I previous to the COVID title, I'd never seen Liverpool win a league title before. And I mentioned, those United fans and people like that I grew up with who were, winning all and sundry and making sure they were rubbing that in my face every time I went into school in the morning. So it's this has been just the build up of 30 plus years, and we got that league title in COVID, which came with all its own sort of beauties and things during a time where so many Liverpool fans, so many people around the world were struggling, getting to grips with the pandemic. We got to have that little bit of light in what was so much a time of darkness, whereas now the idea that we're going to get to do it in the beautiful sunshine, the way it's shining in Liverpool today, and get to do it all together, and get to be in the pubs and bars and in the stadiums, and just get to do it in exactly the way we hoped. I think there's going to be such an outpouring of emotion. I think you're going to see such a focus on Liverpool for that few weeks, and Liverpool's going to put on a show for those people. It seems strange to reference, non-footballing events at a time when it is going to be, a really big footballing event. But you look at like Eurovision and the way that Liverpool has celebrated things that aren't even to do with football, the way that Liverpool's put on a party for, even Taylor Swift coming here and performing at Anfield. I fully expect all those things to bleed into what we're going to see over the next few weeks here in Liverpool. It's going to be an incredible party. I think Liverpool is going to paint itself in such a brilliant light and welcome this party and this outburst of joy that we've been waiting for so many years, because we're so more than ready for it.
Well, these are the times to enjoy, so make sure you do enjoy it. Josh from the Anfield Wrap, thanks for joining us today.